So hello and welcome. My name is Victoria Keane and I'm from Homes England's Local Government Capacity Centre, and I'm delighted to welcome you here today to our summer learning programmes, the third of our learning programmes. We've been spending many months and weeks working out what you need to know about, what you'd like to know more about, and this is the first of 18 sessions. So the summer learning programme offers a series of knowledge sharing sessions on topics, as I've said, that you've told us you're interested about. And today's event is an introduction to the learning programme from our CEO and chairman. Okay, so next slide, please. The summer learning programme is brought to you by the Homes England's Local Government Capacity Centre. And this slide summarises who we are and what we do. We've launched the centre following extensive research and consultation with you across local government and with a whole range of other partners to determine where authorities need most support. I look forward to hearing from you at the end of the session to find out what more you need, and there'll also be a longer, more extensive survey that we'd really like you to answer in your own time. Next slide, please. Thank you. Right, I'm now going to pass over to Elizabeth, and she's going to talk through why we're here today and what we're going to cover. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Victoria, and welcome. Really delighted to see so many people here today. I'm Elizabeth. I'm Assistant Director of Strategy here at Homes England. I also used to work for local government, so really delighted to be able to chair this session today. I will keep my introduction short so that we can hear from the Peters. I think it's really important for Homes England to be talking about capacity with our local government partners, and also for our leaders to share with you the future direction of Homes England and how we really want and need to work with you going forward. I'd like to just get on with the questions that so many of you provided before the session. As Victoria said, please do add further questions to the chat. And if you see a question that comes up that you would particularly like to see addressed by Peter and Peter, just give it that tick, that thumbs up, and we'll do our best to answer that when we get to the Q&A. We're going to hear first from Peter Denton. I've got a number of questions that you all submitted that I get to pepper him with. We'll do that for about 15 minutes and then move over to questioning Peter Freeman before going into a bit more of an open round where they don't know which question is going to hit them. Just kidding. Let's start with you, Peter. So you've been with Homes England almost a year now, since August 2021. Can you tell us a little bit about your priorities for Homes England and what your aspirations for how the agency will be perceived in another 12 to 18 months?
Well, good afternoon, all. It may be approaching 11 months in the real world. In dog years, I think it's probably about 4,050. I was struck by the poll done at the beginning, where there's a mixed understanding of what the agency does, and I think that probably goes to the heart of Elizabeth's question, which is that I don't feel that the agency can support or help if you don't understand what it can do and what it's there for. So I think that one of the first priorities is that with the new Secretary of State, with a levelling up agenda and a reinvigorated housing strategy, it's the right moment for us to launch our revised 5-year corporate strategy, which we'll be doing very, very soon. And I think that will set a context for what the agency can do to help, and then I think as important, how. And so my priorities are to not just deliver a piece of paper that goes into a sort of an email or on a website, but rather to make it real for the different audiences that we have. And local authority audiences is possibly the most important in a sense. So that understanding, both from a short-term as well as a long-term strategy, is to both regeneration, which we're going to talk about, as well as, which is not a short-term game, as well as our continued commitment to the housing market is there, and that's an unquestionable priority in terms of the what we're trying to achieve, all with a good flavour of a levelling up agenda around it. But equally, I think it's always important as to how we do things, and a priority for us is to be able to explain and convey to certainly to local authorities that we're there to support place, that we're there not as some sort of centrist government intervention machine, but rather a way for us to support a place's vision, a local vision for what's needed and how that could be changed within the built environment. Equally, our role is to convey the same level of articulation and priority to the affordable housing sector, to house builders, to our stakeholders, government overall, as well as the private sector. And so one of the challenges of the agency is being able to convey the right messages and the right kind of articulation of our priorities to the different stakeholders. And then also, crucially, is how can we help and how we can explain our statutory powers, our CPO and planning powers, our soft power in the sense of, I guess, who we are as an intermediary between central government and local place, and our what we call our hierarchy of capital, which is that we have different allocations of money, different types of money, all the way through from loans to grant to equity, and how also we can support by bringing the much needed private sector capital and skill set into a wider ambition. So lots to do in terms of activities, but I think if you were to ask me what is the priority, it's to make sure that people are aware of how we can help and how they can access that help.
Thank you, Peter. And you started to touch on this a little bit, but I'd like to ask you to go into a little bit more detail on levelling up and how Homes England will be supporting and delivering on government's levelling up ambitions as set out in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill.
So I'm sure all of you have avidly read the 300 or so pages of the Levelling Up white paper. Lots of interesting phrases. I'm going to mention one because it's an interesting one called the Medici effect. So wait for that to come up in a minute or so. The Levelling Up white paper is a set of aspirations, and I think when it came out there was some question marks of where's the detail. I think what we've seen over the last few months is that it's pitched the tent quite well in the detail, the way that what needs to be supported and how it's supported is varying from different place to different place. There are three broad aspirations of the Levelling Up white paper. One is to reduce the inequalities between places, and that doesn't mean driving down London, the southeast, but it certainly probably does mean driving up more other places. It means about having a level playing field of opportunity, that people can access skills and experiences and training and job opportunities and lifestyle experiences on a more level playing field across the country. And then crucially, that it gives voice to a local place, that it as I keep saying, because it's a very big thematic, that it's local place driving change. And in that, there are 12 missions, which if you were to read them, you would say, well, how could anyone not disagree with better primary school education, better training skills for adults, better networking, network connectivity, either both physical in terms of transport or in internet, and obviously improving productivity and so forth and so forth. The one that we are involved in, the one we're mandated for, is pride of place. And that is a built environment context, which says, how can we support the change of a place? And Peter will talk about that far more eloquently than I will. But what I think is really important is that we don't then just go off and say, right, pride of place means that urban town centres need regeneration, and we need to do this, and we need to do that. Unquestionably, that continues to be an obligation on us to engage with the rest of government. How do we bring transport into the physical infrastructure of transport? How do we bring education in for skills and experience, and so forth and so forth? How do we collectively dragoon all of government to be able to support a place and have a catalytic impact that would be more than individual bits. That's the Medici effect. That's the principle of, in Renaissance Italy, the Renaissance occurred because the Medici family brought engineers, and they brought artists, and they brought sculptors, and they brought mathematicians, astronomers, and that impact into a place catalyzed more than the individual bits. That's a very grand sounding theory to an obvious point, is that if you spark off lots of different things at the same time, you are likely to have a bigger impact. And so the future for the physical built environment, I think, is intrinsically linked to all those other things as well.
Thanks, Peter. I think you've begun to touch very much on the importance of partnership. So that brings me nicely to one of the other questions that was submitted. You've talked about needing to work with a lot of different players across housing and regeneration sectors to achieve our aims, and working in partnership with local leaders. I think the audience would be really interested to hear your take on what Homes England is looking for in our partners, and particularly local government partners, to ensure successful partnership working and delivery of all these ambitious aims.
Yeah, and I think that's more in there than one might initially think, because one of the realities for the agency is that it's tried for a very long time to be a universal help, to be there at all levels for all places. And that is a very, very tough commitment for everyone, because you get spread very quickly. It's very important the agency always supports everywhere to some extent, but equally we have to focus on the places and the opportunities that are going to have not just the near-term impact, but just impact. We use this process. I think many of you will know it, called continuous market engagement, which is a process that we never say no. That when places or opportunities arise, that we don't immediately go, yes, put a bid round in. Okay, here's some money, here's some support, off you go. But rather, we can work with different opportunities and projects for many years before they get to the point that they're investable and ready for engaging. So the continuous market engagement principle is quite strong in the agency. And what we need to make sure is that the things that are bubbling to the top meet certain characteristics, particularly if we're not universally working. So we will want to see certain characteristics of our partners in order for us to be comfortable that those should bubble to the top. And there are four key things that I'll mention here. One, these are self-evident, by the way, but you'd be surprised at how good they are as a test bed for where time and focus should go. So a clear vision for the future role of the place, so that someone like Sheffield or Wolverhampton have been able to do recently, has been able to articulate what they need for their place. I was in Sheffield the other day and looking at some of the things that we're actively involved in, and I hadn't really fully understood why Sheffield said to us, we need housing. That's our key thing. We're feeling pretty good on student accommodation. We're feeling good on the commercial side. We've just finished our Heart of Sheffield project, £500 million in the centre. But the thing we need is housing. We don't have a weekend economy in the centre of Sheffield because we haven't got very much housing there, and we certainly haven't got very much affordable housing. And so when you go around and you see that, you suddenly realise that Sheffield knows what it's talking about and knows what it needs. And sure enough, that is indeed, I think, a very big factor of what they need. Equally, Wolverhampton has a different approach, and whilst housing is always on the agenda, Wolverhampton is looking at its 18 to 21-year-old leavers and how they give them the greatest level of opportunity and jobs, as much as how they bring a vibrancy to the town centre, probably through more of a commercial-based approach. When we say a clear vision of the future of the place, that doesn't mean that you can't come and talk to us when you haven't got that clear vision. I think part of our role is to help you go and get that vision. Peter went to Sheffield last summer. They talked about it only the other day to me, that Peter's challenge to them was work with us and articulate a clear vision. They had that by December, and that was why we were comfortable in recommending them from being a levelling up place. Secondly, partnership approach. got to be willing to work with each other in that local place, people like us, central government, and crucially the private sector. You've got to be willing to align yourself to other forms of investment, and be flexible. So that might be private sector money, that might be different types of engagement from central government, but you've got to be willing to be open-minded and flexible and adaptable. And then lastly, which is often coming up, and I think questions will come up later, capacity and capability, ability to bring together technical competence. Changing place is hard. It's very technically complex. And no one expects any place to have all of those levers itself. It's how you bring them together and make them work.
Thanks, Peter. I think that was a really clear articulation of what we look for, this clear vision for a future role of place, this importance of a partnership approach, being flexible and open-minded and adaptable, and having that capacity and capability to do all of that, bringing people together. I think that's really helpful. What do you see, given what, that vision of what you think we need for partnership and where Homes England is looking to go, what do you think some of the key challenges and opportunities are for local government, and how can we support them to address that?
I think I've seen so many places, and look, levelling up isn't just a Midlands and a North discussion. Levelling up is areas where there's issues of deprivation or productivity or other challenges that warrant intervention. So that could be as much the West Country or Southampton and Plymouth or South Essex or Norwich. So I think it is true that there's a lot of focus in the Midlands and the North, but not to the exclusion of other places. And that matters because I've seen that the really big positive is so many places kind of really standing behind a slogan and making it their own. I've noticed just in the last week that Bradford and I forget somewhere else, there's two places have said, this is our levelling up agenda. And so they've turned a phrase into what it means for them as a local place. I think the real challenge is not to disappoint, in that if you've got so much enthusiasm for change and progress, it's very easy to disappoint, particularly when this is a very long-term game. I wish this was a 1 to 2 year kind of challenge. And I think part of any government, doesn't matter which political creed, any challenge of any government on this is that there is a very much a I want it now kind of sense to life, when something like this is going to take a very long period of time. So the challenge is, how do you not disappoint, and how do you keep all those plates spinning in a way that's progressive and exciting, but realistic about the timeframes involved, and realistic about one can't change everywhere entirely at the same time, and there's a reality to that you have to balance.
Yes, and I think everyone on the call will probably recognize that reality. I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions. I'd like to bring in some of the questions that have come through on the chat, because I think it ties into what you were talking about with Homes England and how we want to engage in that continuous market engagement approach that you flagged. So a couple of our attendees in the chat have talked about the challenge of multiple pots of funding and continuous bidding rounds and trying to join those up, and noted that there was a desire in the white paper to have a single pot of funding for places. And also someone else noting that authorities that are better at bidding tend to win the bids. And I know that you'll recognize those challenges, because I know we've talked about that a lot within Homes England. What would you like to say about that, and how Homes England's approach to working with local authorities can help tackle some of these issues, and our role as Homes England within the wider government approach?
So I think there are two different points. One is on buckets of money, and then secondly is on bid versus CME. So on the first, single pot of money. So someone that I used to work for, and I quote this a lot, said to me, the biggest gift I can give you is you can do anything you like. And the biggest curse I can give you is you can do anything you like. So whilst I see there is an innate attraction to a single pot of money, that comes with its own complications because of precision as to how you use it. And I now get why Treasury in particular is so dogmatic about certain things, because it's the only place in government doling out money whilst everyone else takes it. So it has to have that kind of nature. So programs of money are not in themselves, in my view, necessarily bad things. They give precision to policy outcome, and they give clarity as to what value for money means. The challenge, as the Secretary of State is highlighting, is that if you're a place, you don't care that there's 190 separate programs of money within the department and ourselves or whatever it is. You just want someone to help you. And I think that the biggest thing we need to do is not necessarily say that the program of money do not exist, but it's our job to shield you from it. Our job is there to kind of to make it happen, like the proverbial swan, where we're paddling furiously, but you don't notice any of that. So how do we turn programs to a place-based focus? I think that's our job, and I'd like to think you will see that coming through at the moment. In Sheffield alone, just because I'm fresh off doing it this morning, we have 9 separate work streams of work in Sheffield with multifunctional teams that are all working across the agency to deliver on Sheffield's ambition. Sheffield has no idea where all that different money's coming from, and they just see 9 different work streams. Your second question is on bids, and I've seen some spectacularly bad examples of bid-based processes already. I've seen some pretty good ones. I think it's not a them and us, or that's bad, that's good. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. I think it's how you use them. I think asking people to estimate infrastructure costs before you've got it fully costed, and years before you ever start a project, I think that's a very difficult bid-based process. Equally, I think there's ones that you can run that are closer in time and certainty, that are realistic and sensible. I do recognize the ability to write a good bid is a skill set that some have and some don't. CME is not perfect either. The danger is you lack focus and precision, but it also recognizes that part of our role is to nurture, support, and help people get to the right point, as opposed to being fully formed at the time.
Thank you, Peter. That brings us to the end of this round of Grilling You, although we'll come back to later. I'd like to move on to Peter Freeman now. There he is. Hi, Peter.
Hi.
Your turn in the hot seat.
Oh,
so, yeah, got quite a few questions that were submitted by attendees before the session that we'd like to hear your thoughts on. And the first one is something that I know you and I have talked about a lot, so looking forward to hearing from you on this. So then this is about all of the noise we've been hearing from government about the importance of beauty in creating places that people are proud of. How do you see Homes England's role in supporting this agenda?
First, a few words about why I think it matters. And for me, beauty in place is not particularly about any particular style of architecture, or whether it's vernacular or not. It's about places being welcoming, encouraging people to dwell, being safe, being attractive. That can be any style of architecture. It needs public open space, it needs landscape, it needs places to sit. And all of those things help people to go out, feel safe, meet their neighbours, walk, have exercise. And going back to Peter's comment on the Medici effect, in a way, having town centres that are places that people want to hang about in and go for many reasons. They don't just have an occasional visit to the cinema or the hospital. When they go into town, they can do 3 or 4 multiple things, and going into town actually maybe just a walk or a quick cycle ride or 1 bus stop from home, rather than 5 miles around a dual carriageway and a ring road. That's what creates an active, healthy, integrated society. So underlying it, any codes on beauty, it's the purpose of it is to give people a better, richer life. Homes England itself has a role in thought leadership, and it also has a role potentially in a slightly more sort of enforced exemplary way. In terms of thought leadership, the agency helps create things like Building for a Healthy Life as a set of standards, and to disseminate them, working with design networks. And we're now looking at Streets for a Healthy Life. But because we are a purveyor of land, and we can sell the land with conditions about what you build on it, because we're a lender of money, and we can say, if you want to borrow our money as a developer, there's some conditions about what you build. And because we give grants, and again, we can put conditions, we are in a position to try and drive the agenda. And I think until recently, it wasn't top of the agenda for MHCLG as was. I think DLUC would really like us to see us pushing this. And my own experience as a developer is it matters and it's worthwhile.
Thank you, Peter. Coming back, I suppose, to your experience as a developer, I want to talk to you about regeneration, which is, I know, a topic you know quite a bit about and is very close to your heart. Can you tell us a bit more about the intended role of Homes England and regeneration, and what lessons you think the agency will bring to deliver a successful program of regeneration going forward?
Sure. And again, sort of slightly defining terms first. I think regeneration in part means doing something probably on a brownfield land where something has happened in the past and where the current state isn't great. And so you are regenerating in the sense of improving. But going back to the things I said about beauty, it's not just to replace a derelict sort of knackers yard for cars with a building. It's in the combined area of many derelict knackers yards to create places that people want to come. And for me, mixed use is very important because it encourages 24/7, 7 days a week. Historically, going back to sort of English partnership roots, Homes England or its predecessors were very involved in regeneration. Over the last few years, we've been much more focused just on housing. And I think with the levelling up agenda, we will once again be focusing on the whole placemaking, economy growing, mix of uses, with housing as a very, very important key contribution. I think in terms of Homes England's role, it's also important to say, what the private sector or a local authority can do by itself and where they might need help. A term I was much introduced to when I first came to Homes England was market failure. And it's not a term I particularly like. I don't like the concept of failure, but there are gaps in what the market can naturally do and is willing to do. Peter referred to the fact that, regeneration schemes can take 10, 15, 20 years, and he's absolutely right. And the important thing is to get the initial phase going, the phase where you get the vision, where you get the land assembly, where you get a business plan, where you get the right governance between local authorities, developers, landowners, and whatever. And I think Homes England can have a tremendous role there. The thing that frightens off most developers, I often say when people say, why did you win King's Cross? I say, nobody else wanted it. Too difficult, too damn long. We can help assemble land. We have statutory powers. We can work and help with capacity and capability with the local authority to help lend them the kind of thinking process and the debate to come up with a good vision. We can put in money early for infrastructure, either as a grant to somebody else or a loan, or indeed where we buy in the land, we can put in the infrastructure ourselves. And at the end of the day, once you've got a site ready to go for a particular building or set of buildings, whether they're homes or offices or shops or a leisure centre, there's tons of private sector developers who can do it very well. But to get to the stage where a bunch of different sites, which need to be assembled, which are in a terrible state, which rely on some external infrastructure, to get to the state where they are individually serviced plots is something where I feel Homes England has a huge role to play. And in doing that, we will use the mixture of sort of soft power, advisory power, compulsory purchase if necessary, and all the financial instruments I've mentioned. Sorry, last thing we probably do is a phrase we use a lot is a coalition of the willing, and the coalition of the willing is to an extent bringing together the local authorities, the landowners, the developers, the occupiers, but it's also fostering a class of developers, the developers who are willing to be involved in mixed use and placemaking for a long time. And that's something we're very actively looking at. We have a wonderful relationship with a company called Muse through something called the English Cities Fund alongside Legal and General. And they're absolutely terrific, but we need more of them, and we will help foster more to get to more regeneration.
Thank you, Peter. I think one of the things that came through in that, as did in Peter Denton's comments, is the importance when you have these complex regeneration schemes of working in partnership. As you say, there might be developments with lots of different bits of land and lots of actors and lots of complexities that, like King's Cross 20 years ago, no one wants to touch. Thinking about that and thinking about our audience, what do you think can be done differently in partnership working to ensure that we're sort of collectively working together to deliver on these local visions, these homes that people want to live in and neighborhoods people are proud of? I guess it's a question about our sort of mode of working.
Yeah, alignment of interest along with coalition of willings is terribly important. And I think the whole development process often goes wrong from the very start, because the person who wins the site, the winning bidder, is by definition normally the person who paid most for the site. And the person who paid most for the site may not be the same person as who will actually create the best place. And I think working with government, we are increasingly getting to a point where there is a recognition that the total end outcome of the finished project in 20 years' time, in terms of well-being, societal health, social justice, increments to the economy, is a part of the winning price. So I think one of the things we need to do is to have a bidding systems that don't just have a sort of tick in the box for beauty or a tick in the box for a bit of new primary school or a bit of a village green, but really bring out the commitment and the ability of the bidder, which may often be a consortium, to bring in different skills, and the consortium's design team to create something special. And from my point of view, it's not a crying shame if a sandwich you buy at lunchtime isn't the best sandwich ever. It's gone one way or another in 10 or 15 minutes. It's a crying shame if we put up buildings that should last 50 to 150 years, maybe forever, and they're awful. And it's a crying shame if we don't create the right public spaces between them while we're doing it. And I remember walking around with Dimitri Porphyrios, who was one of the King's Cross master planners and a particular favourite of Prince Charles. And we were walking around a town in France. We'd gone on a jaunt in, and he said, stop looking at the elevations, look at the space between it. The space between the buildings is what endures. You've got to get land into the developer's hands on a basis that means he can afford to put infrastructure in, put the infrastructure up front. I think increasingly government should try and co-invest with major developers, not just sell on the land, so that there is some retained interest and control. And there's also a kind of institutional memory. For good regeneration, you need a great master plan, a great business plan, and a great set of joint venture governance arrangements that all speak to each other.
Thank you. I think we're have time for maybe one more question. I think given where you were just going in your comments, Peter, I want to come to a question that came up in the chat about how the heart of any successful regeneration project is the correct financial model to ensure value for money from all funding streams, public and private. I think you were starting to kind of talk about that, the sort of underlying delivery model and what will deliver that long-term value. Would you like to comment on that a bit more?
Sure. A couple of things. First of all, one of the roles I see for government, Homes England, local authorities, is to reduce what's perceived as risk and uncertainty for developers. Because if you reduce the risk and uncertainty by making the planning and the site assembly more straightforward, the developer's required return comes down a lot. And this may be mumbo jumbo to those who are not very mathematically inclined here, but if you're mathematically inclined and you think that somebody wants a 15% return, which is not so unreasonable for something very difficult like regeneration, and they want it for 15 years, that means they actually want 8 times what they invested back. That's killed any project before it started. It certainly killed the ability to put in infrastructure up front. If you can reduce the amount they want back per annum, because you've reduced the risk considerably, suddenly sites become much more viable. So reducing the cost of money has a huge impact on the number of schemes that come forward and the amount of public grant they need and the quality of the sort of public place and the amenities. Does that cover your question, or is there more?
No, I think it does. And I think actually we're about to move into bringing Peter back in. So I might actually take the opportunity, Peter Denton, if you're able to come back on camera, to put the question to you as well, which is about innovation in models of delivery and how you ensure value for money. But I think also just be interesting to hear from you more broadly about innovation in models of delivery, particularly some of these sort of complex regeneration schemes and leveling up areas, because I know it's something you've been thinking about quite a lot. I think
there is a slightly trite but still nevertheless true phrase of the each circumstance, each situation is slightly different, and I think that is right. The agency, long before Peter and I were at the agency, has already demonstrated quite a lot of innovation. If you think about it, we run strategies that look to diversify the house building market. So we support SMEs. We support over 600 SMEs day to day in terms of working capital, with an aim of helping them flourish and blossom to diversify the overall house building market. The agency's brought in equity partners from the institutional private side to support more affordable house building than would have otherwise occurred. And actually, I think in reflection of government, government's been pretty good at sort of taking the agency's suggestions of how we change and how we innovate to solve a problem. The private rented sector struggled to get things built because there was no long-term funding for the private rented sector. We set up a 3 billion program of guarantees to be able to support that. It was wildly successful, and that's one of the reasons we only ever used 2 billion of those guarantees, because the market created itself a financing market for that. So as we look for regen now, I think there's a number of different things we will be innovating on and looking to agree with our colleagues in Treasury. But one sort of overriding theme for me is the principle of operational leverage. And operational leverage is that there's 1,300 good souls at the agency, and they can do quite a lot, but they can only do so much, and they only have skill sets for so much. Whereas the wider market has lots of people and lots of skill sets and lots of opportunity to leverage off that. And so our role, in part, is to be there to support others to do things. So when a commercial real estate owner of a shopping centre in the centre of a Midlands city or town says that this has got 50% too much retail now, there are different ways we could innovate there. One is they know what they're doing, they know what needs to be changed, and they just need certain types of funding to be able to support that ambition. And we as the agency, if the market would struggle to do it itself, we should be there to support them in achieving that ambition. Definitely provided we agree that they're meeting the criteria of what the local place needs and wants, as well as the quality of what they're doing. But equally, it might be situations where that partner or that player is not the one that wants to take that forward, and we might actually directly intervene by buying that site ourselves with the view for helping it change. But again, we're not reflecting that we're going to do all of that ourselves. We have partnerships, as Peter mentioned, with English Cities Fund and others, and we will bring skill sets and experience in to leverage off to be able to make that ambition real. The final one is that the agency, as an example, the agency has not used for quite a while, is its compulsory purchase order powers. And so, interestingly, I think our view is that we have these CPO powers that are the best in the country. They've been underutilized. The new Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill will further enhance them, that's going through Parliament right now. And those powers should be available to place to be able to use if it wants, to be able to accelerate and achieve an ambition on change. But equally, if we feel that others in the housing association sector or in the private sector are doing things that we buy into and the local place does, then why can't we lend our powers out to them as well to achieve it? So innovation is about using soft power, statutory powers, capital, and creativity to support each individual situation as it arises.
Thank you. And I think you started to answer one of the other questions, which was about what Homes England can do to support local authorities to access skills, knowledge, and resources they need in some of that. Is there anything else, Peter Freeman, that you would like to add in terms of what you think the agency can do?
We are about to trial, and I'll let you know in 6 months how it goes. We've put together a panel of about 40 wise people who have either in the public sector or as developers or consultants been very strongly involved in major regeneration. And we're about to try on 3 towns how several of that panel can help a town look at its vision. I mean, I think part of what we can do is give reassurance back. We need local authority leaders who are dynamic and want to achieve change. You know, if they're not fighting for it, we shouldn't be in their town fighting for it. They have to be fighting for it. But I think we can also help establish for them the credibility of what they're doing, even if it's not bricks and mortar tomorrow, by sending teams there, by putting the business cases together, by helping raise finance, by putting in paid consultants, either paid by us or paid by us and the local authority. And it's giving that sense that their vision has a critical mass and is on track.
Thank you. I wonder if we can get in, we're coming to the end, we probably have time for 2 or 3 more questions. I wonder if we can get to a little bit more kind of nuts and bolts to give some examples to the audience of what our partnerships with local government will look like. Somebody ahead of the session asked what we're doing with combined authorities like Greater Manchester, for example. Is there anything either of you would like to come in to give us an example of how this productive collaboration can work between Homes England and local government?
Peter, I'm happy to. So I think combined authorities are different in different areas, and so again, my experience so far has been that you have to appreciate the individual situation. So Manchester is a really good one. You know, that grouping of local authorities has existed. I think it's 10, isn't it? It's existed for a very long time, and has been incredibly well coordinated, where the Mayor of Salford is also the housing lead, for example, and there's a responsibility that doesn't create this very hard distinction between the combined authority and the local authority. And I think that both bring something to it. The transport vision and the holistic geospatial planning of the whole area of Greater Manchester is a result of the combined authorities' focus on that, and the corralling and arrangement of individual areas. And that means that it becomes, it's never straightforward, but it becomes easier for Homes England to be involved in ANCOTES, where we've helped through grant to help regenerate quite a challenged area of Manchester, as well as looking at Salford, where English Cities Fund over 20 years have been instrumental in that transformation through a vehicle, as much as our affordable housing and grant support for Manchester Piccadilly and the north 15,000 homes around Piccadilly Station, as well as our involvement in Mayfield, as well as our discussions and support in advice and other things with Stockport Mayoral Development Corporation. So done correctly, it means that the agency can work with individual local authorities, but in a highly coordinated and thoughtful way with the combined authority as a whole, where it is pretty seamless. It's not always like that, and it's not always like that in Manchester, but when it works, it really works well.
Can I just say something about an authority I visited last week? Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole was three authorities which chose to become one. And because they've become one, that they can look at an area that's probably the same population as Bristol, whereas before it was three relatively small districts. They are creating a property company owned by the council, into which they think they may have a pipeline of 15,000 homes on land owned by the council. And that suddenly becomes incredibly attractive for us as a counterparty to interact with, because they've taken the first steps, they've had the vision, they've gone much broader than saying, there's one site, can you help us on it? Or one site that they've flogged to a developer who wants some help. They're actually laying out a pipeline that you could look at sort of financing and putting over a timetable for 20 years. And I think you have to applaud the ambition of local authorities who really look at the combination of what their ambition is for changing the space and the mix of uses and homes in a town, and using their own land ownership as well.
I think that actually segues really nicely to a question that Heather from Sefton has put, a couple of questions that Heather's put into the chat. We've had a bit of a back and forth, which is about that repurposing of space. So Homes England has traditionally, in the last few years, been about creating new things. But as we move into regeneration, might we be getting involved in working with local authorities to reconfigure existing space, particularly underutilized office space? But I think the nuance within that is people's concerns around some of the quality of homes that have been created under permitted development rights, and how we can support that, but also incentivize good quality design to make sure that the people living in these places have the best possible home. Peter Denton, I'm going to to you.
I think a few weeks ago, I'm trying to remember where it was. Bury it was. So I was talking to an investor in Bury who said to build a new home in Bury was around about £230 a square foot, and to sell it was about £170 a foot. So the reality is that there are situations, there are places where the economics are quite challenging, and part of the longer term ambition is the wider levelling up has got to be to create a soft landing spot for where that viability occurs. You can't just gentrify, because gentrification in a more pejorative phrase leads to values going up, and lo and behold, suddenly construction costs are below values, but you just crowd out local people and you crowd out affordable housing. So it's got to be a soft landing spot, which makes it even harder. I think our argument would be is that the way the levelling up is working, or should work, is that there's greater coordination, call it that, greater control, that's another word, greater master planning, it's another phrase, over what happens to an area in totality, as opposed to strip farming. And therefore the ability to not just create quality requirements in individual buildings and individual things, but to create a quality of an overall place is enhanced. And Peter talks, and I'm just stealing Peter's words, Peter talks about stewardship a lot. That there needs to be a stewardship for the totality of a place as much as the individual buildings. And so quality, we have a view of quality that's much broader than the word quality. That means placemaking, social equity, that it means that stewardship, that there's a vision for the long term, as much as sustainability and prima facie quality. We are finding it surprisingly, the positive is we're finding it possible to achieve that in more places than I thought would be when we first embarked on this journey. But there's still inevitably places where that capital dynamic is really quite challenging.
Taking on from what Peter said, in Bournemouth, there's quite a lot of 60s and 70s office buildings that are converting to residential under PDR, and it probably doesn't make the best accommodation. But if that is the way a town centre is going, then it probably is beholden on the council to put in the kind of pocket parks and pocket playgrounds nearby, so that there is some amenity and quality of life to make up for potentially a relatively soulless building. I'd also observed that in some of those sort of 60s and 70s office buildings that do sell into the development market at very low prices, because they're no longer wanted for offices, and knocking them down doesn't work. Actually, building a flat within them, the cost is in the wiring and the bathrooms and the kitchen, whatever. Building space when you've already got the outer walls doesn't cost very much, and I don't know whether more could be done to push the sizes up, because the construction cost is not pro rata to the size, and quality of life is significantly affected by how much space you've got.
Elizabeth, just to finally add, I think one of the really biggest challenges I think we as society have over this coming period is that dynamic, that desire to level up, to improve a built environment experience, whilst balancing that with the carbon agenda, and not least embodied carbon. And I wish it was just as simplistic as let's demolish that really ugly building, or that end of life building, and then facing the challenge that 50% or so of total carbon emissions come from the building and demolition of a building. So there is that horrible balancing act that I think society as a whole is going to really struggle with. I was with a local authority a couple of weeks ago, and they pointed out their own town hall, their own kind of offices, not the town hall, their offices, and that they wanted to do something on the site. And my immediate response was, oh my, level it, blow it up and start again. And then I looked at the massing, and they walked me through their thinking, which was that would be the optimal option if it wasn't for embodied carbon. Because of embodied carbon, there is a suboptimal outcome from retaining the existing building and adapting it. And I think that kind of honest debate is going to play out on almost every high street, every area of every town and city in the country.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, and I in an hour in which you have covered an enormous range of topics, Peter, I'm glad we fit that one in as well. I think you've really covered the full range, although I know there's probably a lot more questions. Unfortunately, we're out of time. So with that, thank you so much. I'm going to hand back over to Victoria now.
So thank you so much to Peter and Elizabeth, and for everyone for attending. Thank you and goodbye.